Can you guys see my comment? Walaikum salam. Yo, what's happening, man? I'm glad you guys can come over here. Hopefully everybody switches. Salam. Good to see you. Good to see you. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, we'll start our class in 1 minute. I just want to give everybody who wants to come over a chance. I'm not sure if I left a comment to tell them I was live over here, but I'm not sure if they even saw it. Yeah, this seems to be working good. Someone over here said there's something wrong with YouTube also. Okay, well, you know what? We're gonna start the class over here on both. I'm gonna keep them both live. Alhamdulillah. And that way it's recording on YouTube anyway. So if it lags now, it'll be recorded. So then you go back and see it, inshallah. Okay, so let's just do that for now, and then who knows what's going on. Hopefully something will get figured out at some point. Inshallah. So, like we were saying, so what I was basically saying was that the Quran is something that we want to make relevant for all times. So in this current political landscape that we have going on, that's why my thoughts have been focused a lot around thinking about different political applications of the Quranic message. Because again, the Quran tells us to be a warner, right? To be a nadir, to be someone who warns our people, right? So a warner is going to be someone who is applying the message to current circumstances. You're not warning about something that happened like 100 years ago. You're warning about something that's relevant now. So my thoughts have been really focused in how do we take the message of the Quran and apply it and to help us understand some of the things that are happening now. And as I was saying, that's why we had the study about what does the right and left mean from a Quranic standpoint, because a lot of people use these terms or use this terminology in political discourse. They talk about the right, they talk about the left. So it made me start to think more about what does right and left mean in the Quran, because those terms are also used in the Quran. And like we were reviewing some of what we talked about, that al-yamin, what's often translated as right, from a Quranic standpoint, if you analyze the word, because it basically means blessings, and it has a relationship in letters to the word amin, which means security, and the ya at the beginning indicates like a flowing, something that's flowing or continuous. So al-yamin could be then, from that analysis, can be the outward flowing of safety and security and growth and blessings, whereas ash-shimal indicates something being enclosed, right? Just like the verse in the Quran says, أَوْ مَشْتَمَلَتْ عَلَيْهِ أَرْحَامُ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. It speaks about what's contained in the wombs, but it uses the word ishtamalat, which is related to the word shimal, which is translated as left. So it uses this word to reference something that is contained in wombs, right? And it's talking, this particular verse, it's talking about an'am, livestock. So from that, we concluded that perhaps one way we in the wombs, right? So it's in the beginning stages of development. Likewise, shimal, which we translate as the left, is something that's enclosed and is not growing. It is in primitive stages of development. It lacks maturity, for example. Whereas al-yamin is something that is flowing outward, right, and is growing outward towards maturity. So that's a different way to think about right and left from a Quranic standpoint, which is a lot different than how it's presented in political discourse. So I think one of the things that the Quran helps us to do, it not only helps us to understand current events, and not only helps us to understand the political climate or certain perspectives, but it also helps us to transcend the current climate and current events. And what I mean by transcend is right and left, for example, politically is presented in a certain way that it has certain meanings. But when we understand it, we choose to understand it differently from a Quranic standpoint, then we transcend what the average everyday person means by right and left, if that makes sense. So, for example, with this new understanding of right and left, al yamin, then we start to look at, for example, there's a hadith that says, "Inna al-muqsitina ala manabiri min nur." It says that those who do justice, al-muqsitin, those who do justice are upon ala manabiri min nur. They are upon pulpits of light. An yamin ar-Rahman, upon the right hand of ar-Rahman. So if you think of yamin as, hey, salam, Han, I'm glad you came. If you think of yamin as just meaning like literally your right hand or a right hand, what does it mean that those who do justice are an yamin ar-Rahman? As this hadith states, that they are on the right hand of ar-Rahman. Alhamdulillah, I see you over there, Hannah. What does it mean, right? That they are on the yameen of ar-Rahman, right? And then if you keep reading the hadith, if you think about it as right and left, like sides of the body, it would get more confusing, because then it says, وَكِلْتَ يَدَيْهِ يَمِينٌ. Salam. And both of his hands are right hands. So what does that mean, right? So according to this interpretation that we analyzed in our last class, that al-yamin doesn't refer to one side or the other, but it really just means the outward flow of growth, maturity, blessings, security, safety, all these different meanings. Then who is being talked about in this particular hadith? Those who do justice. Innal muqsitina ala manabiri min nur. That those who do justice are upon pulpits of light. An yamin ar-Rahman. They are on the yameen of ar-Rahman. Not the right hand. They are on the yameen, meaning when you do justice, you are connected to the yameen of ar-Rahman. You are connected to the outward flow of growth, energy, safety, security that comes from ar-Rahman. Wakilta yadayhi yamin. And both of his hands are yamin, meaning anywhere you are connected to ar-Rahman, you're going to grow and you're going to have safety and security. So thinking about what it means to be on the right or the left from a Quranic standpoint is completely different. It's about justice, it's about growth, it's about safety, it's about maturity. And you can even think about that, and this might be, alhamdulillah, this might be controversial to some, but this is how I think about it. You can even think about that. There's a hadith that speaks about eating with, they translate it as your right hand. Kul bi yaminik, eat with your yamin. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, subhanAllah. They say eat with your yamin. They say that means your right hand, right? Like literally the right side of the body. But according to this way of thinking about yamin, another way to think about it is it means when you eat, your salam, your eating should be connected to growth and maturity and safety and security. And that's why in the Quran, you don't find anything about eating with a certain side of the body. In fact, what do you find? It says, Kulu washrabu wala tusrifu. Eat and drink and do not be excessive. So not being excessive is eating with yamin, as expressed in the hadith. Potentially, perhaps, right? Is eating with growth and maturity, right? So when you start to think about these words like that, you not only understand, or it not only helps you understand and analyze the current climate and the current political discourse, but it helps you transcend it. Meaning you begin to think about it in your own unique way based on the Quran, and not just limited to the terminology that's given to you, that's handed down to you. Because believe me, terminology, words affect how you think. So if you just accept, to some extent, we have to accept terminology. Alhamdulillah. Oh, for sure. For sure. To some extent, we have to accept terminology, right? Because we have to communicate. But we shouldn't accept it in an unquestioning way, right? So especially when it comes to really important terminology. When it comes to day-to-day communication, that's one thing. But when it comes to terminology that is more aligned with a certain ideology, then we have to question what that terminology means and how it affects our thought process to adopt it. So, for example, on one of my videos, somebody said, I can't remember what they said. They commented on one of my videos. It was something about being left. They said left something or the other. They were referring to me. And the only thing I said in response, I said, An Yamin al-Rahman. And I'm not even sure if they got it or not. And I wasn't worried if they got it or not. Because if you don't get that, then what from what perspective or from what knowledge base are you commenting from? Right. So my response to them saying, oh, subhanAllah, right. No, that's an important point. So they said I'm left-handed, so I like that way of thinking a lot. No, I totally agree. Um, I totally agree because I totally agree because I think that the way left and right is traditionally interpreted, I think it's kind of biased towards people who might be naturally left-handed. And why would, and again, this is just my thinking, no disrespect to anyone who thinks differently. Um, More than entitled to your way of thinking about it. But this is just what makes sense to me personally. That why would Allah be upset with me for a particular side of my body when He created my whole body? Why would one side of my body be bad and the other side of my body be good? So to me, I think the meaning is a lot deeper than that. And I think that we have to analyze things on a deeper level. So to me, that just to me logically makes sense. And it fits, with the Arabic of it. It fits when you take the hadith and you put it with the Quran from that understanding. It fits, right? It connects because you could ask, like, well, why, if eating literally with your right hand was of that level of importance, why isn't it mentioned in the Quran anywhere? But actually, it is if you think about it differently. Kulu washrabu wala tusrifu. Eat and drink, and do not be excessive. Kul bi yaminik. The hadith expresses it a little bit differently. Eat bi yaminika. Right, subhanAllah. Yeah, for sure. Eat with your yamin. Eat with your blessing and your growth and maturity and your security and all these different meanings. And that way it's not biased towards, one hand or the other. It's something that's in the control of everyone. Because if you're focusing only on a side of the body, that's not even in your control. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah does not burden, as the Quran says, Allah does not burden a soul with more than it can bear, right? So why would you be looked down upon for something that's not even in your control? You don't choose which hand is your dominant hand, right? But thinking about it this way, it is in your control because it is in your control whether or not you eat excessively, you eat maturely, you eat from the perspective of growth. I don't always eat like that. SubhanAllah, right, right, for sure. People force you to use one hand or the other sometimes, and I personally think that's a little unjust. And I've been guilty of that, in my earlier days of being Muslim. I was very rigid and traditional, so I was guilty of making that a big issue. But as I personally grew more and thought about it more and studied more, I came to different conclusions that make sense for me. And I wouldn't try to force those conclusions on anyone else. If it makes sense to you, alhamdulillah. If it doesn't, that's cool. That's what we're here for, just to dialogue and to study. My main point, though, is this is what I mean by how studying the Quran can make you transcend, right, the average everyday discussion because everyone is talking about right, left, right, when it comes to politics. So from a Quranic standpoint, we can say, yeah, I want to be Yameen, but not like you mean it, right? Because Yameen, they would translate as right. So they would say, oh, so you're right wing. No, An Yameen al-Rahman. That's why I commented like I did to the person who commented on my video. I said, if you want to know my political affiliation, I am An Yamin al-Rahman, or at least I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be upon the Yamin of Ar-Rahman. And who was upon the Yamin of Ar-Rahman? It says in that hadith, Al-Muqsitin, those who are doing justice. So I'm trying, and I'm not saying I'm perfect in it, and I know I fall short, but I'm trying my best to be a just and fair person to all people. And I think that's what it means to be an yamin ar-Rahman, to be a person that is conducive to everyone's growth and to everyone's safety and security, and not limiting that to one group of people or people from a certain background or whatever it might be. And I think that what's often missing from our discourse in general in the world, but our Islamic discourse also, is what I believe is one certain universal truth, which is that we all know what it's like to suffer. And I'm going to explain that in a second. I need to drink a little water on my mouth's dry. So, what I mean by that is there's a lot of things that can be debated. There's a lot of things that we might not be sure of. There's a lot of aspects of knowledge that are uncertain. There's a lot of aspects of life that are uncertain. There's a lot of aspects of what's going on in the world that are uncertain. But one universal truth that we can all agree on, and that affects everyone, is that every one of us as a conscious being understands what it's like to suffer. And we know that we don't want to suffer. And so, therefore, if we can understand that and we know that we don't want that, then it's a logical conclusion that we can understand what another person is going through when they suffer. And so, therefore, since we don't want to suffer, we should also do what we can to alleviate suffering from others. And that is one thing that I think we can all agree on. If we put aside everything else, I think we can all agree on that one principle, that suffering, to the extent possible, should be alleviated from sentient beings, right? So I think that in the interpretation of the Quran, or for other people, the interpretation of their scriptures should be centered around that principle. So me personally, in my study of the Quran, that's the principle I'm trying to make as a grounding principle, because everything else is uncertain, right? You can say this person has this interpretation. We look at it like this. We might have this interpretation. This kind of makes sense. Maybe this doesn't make sense. You can debate all that back and forth. But at the end of the day, I think that a grounding principle for me is, does this interpretation create suffering or does it alleviate suffering? And if it creates suffering for people, in my personal opinion, I don't think it's a good interpretation. And I think that follows from a verse in the Quran where Allah tells us, فَبَشِّرْ عِبَادِ, so give glad tidings to my servants, الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ, those who listen to the word and they follow what is most beautiful thereof. So in following what is most beautiful thereof, that's, to me, what applies to that principle of alleviating suffering. If you're creating suffering through your interpretations of religious texts, then I think that that's not a beautiful interpretation. So I think your interpretation should be grounded in alleviating suffering from yourself and from others, and at the very least, not creating more. If you can't alleviate suffering, at the very least, don't create more suffering. So to me, that's what it means to be an yamin ar-Rahman, to be on the right, on the yamin of ar-Rahman. So that's an example from what we talked about before of how I believe the study of the Quran can actually help us transcend, not just understand the current climate, the current political discourse, but to actually transcend it and to think on a different level. So that brings me to today's topic, even though that's today's topic too, what I just talked about. But that's more of a review of what we talked about, and plus connecting it to the idea of suffering. But today's topic, what I want to talk about is, it's a really fancy word, but I want to share this word with you guys because I think it's a really important word to help understand what we're going to be talking about. And this word is triumvirate. So I think I wrote it in the description over here, but I'm going to write it in the chat on YouTube, and then I'll write it on TikTok. So triumvirate. So I'll write that first over there, and I'll write it over here next, and then I'll explain it. Triumvirate. So remember, I told you guys terminology is important, right? So you could say, why not just use a simpler word? And you probably could. But in general, it's good to try to use words that are more common to explain what you're trying to explain, so everyone can be on the same page. Yeah, you were thinking that right. However, I think some terminology captures an idea so well that I think we should just learn that terminology because it helps to shape how you're thinking about something, if that makes sense. So, triumvirate is an interesting word, it's an interesting concept. Basically, the root meaning of it is it means three men in power. That's literally what it means. Three men in power. Okay. Um, triumvirate, three men in power. Okay. Yeah, that's literally what it means. Triumvirate. Okay. And I want us to learn this word. Don't shy away from learning this word and other words because I believe again, I'll say this again. Yes, when you're delivering a message, you should try to be clear and you should try to use words that are clear and not just use big words to make yourself sound smart. I 100% agree with that. Um, I also believe that there are some words, again, that convey a concept. See, a word is an idea. So don't underestimate learning words. A word is an idea, okay? A word is like a capsule for an idea. So when you take a word, it's like, you know how you have a pill, it's like a capsule and has the medicine inside, and you swallow it and it opens up and it distributes the medicine throughout your body from the capsule breaking open. That's similar to what a word is. A word is like a capsule, right? And it holds an idea. And then once you are able to internalize that word and understand the idea that it holds, then the idea can permeate your way of thinking, right? It can help you see the world differently. It can help you put things in certain perspectives, right? Because sometimes let me give you this example to show you the power of words. There's many examples, but I think this is an interesting one. Have you ever heard that? Sorry, have you ever heard that expression that people say? And I started off really not liking this expression, but over time I grew to like it. So this expression people say, they'll say, I'm feeling some type of way. You guys familiar with that expression? People say, I'm feeling some type of way. I'm sure you guys have heard that before, right? Oh, you're in the UK, so maybe not. So that's an expression that a lot of us have. We'll say, man, that got me feeling some type of way, man. But think about that. Why would we phrase it like that? Feeling some type of way. So what that basically says is I feel something, right? But I can't really describe it or put my finger on exactly what that's making me feel. I'm feeling some type of way, right? It's very, if you think about it, uh, yeah, if you think about it, it's actually a really accurate way to describe a mind state of feeling something but not being able to express it. I'm feeling some type of way. Man, that got me feeling some type of way, right? But why is that? Why do we, even if you've never heard that expression, I'm sure we've all had the experience of feeling something but not being able to put our finger on exactly what it is. Right. It can be said in either situation, right? Right. Whether good or bad situation, you can say, I'm feeling some type of way, right? So you felt before, I'm sure, some kind of emotion or feeling that you couldn't really put into words, and you had to really think about how to express what you feel. So that's a good example of the power of words, because there probably was a word that describes how you feel, or there might have been three or four, or a sentence that describes how you feel, but you couldn't find the exact words. So you had, think about that. Like you were living something. You had a lived experience. You were feeling something that was very real to you, but you couldn't find the words. There were probably words that would describe it, but you couldn't, either you didn't know the words or they weren't coming to you. You didn't have the words, right? So that's an example to show when you have words to describe things, they make your ability to communicate a lot more accurate, even with yourself, because you can describe to yourself something more accurately if you have the words for it, right? So don't underestimate, yes, in communication, it's good to speak at the level of the people that you're speaking to, in the sense of relating to the audience, right? And not using big words just to make yourself seem smart. But don't underestimate the importance of learning words from the perspective of learning concepts. So if you learn a word, you learned a new concept, you learned an idea that helps you explain the world. Okay. So that's why I think it's really important to introduce you to this word, triumvirate. Triumvirate. Okay, I'm going to keep saying it because I want you to be able to say it. Google it, write it down, learn this word, triumvirate. And what this word means, I'm going to give you a really simple definition of what it means. And then we're going to build on it. We're going to talk more and more about it. We're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. Triumvirate means three men in power. That's literally what it means. Three men in power. Triumvirate. Three men in power. Okay. Now, why this word is important is it recognizes something that you'll see all throughout history. And I'm going to give you more examples tomorrow. Today is just an introduction to the concept. I'm going to give you more examples tomorrow, but just give me 1 second because I see my my phone over here is looking like it's, oh, sorry, I knocked it down. My phone. Yeah, do that. My phone looks like it's about to die. So let me, I don't want to lose the live, even though we're still live on YouTube. But since we got people over here too, hold on 1 second. There we go. All right. Triumvirate. Three men in power. Okay. So why this is important is because if you look throughout history, you will see a common theme reoccurring. And that is that in different situations of power, political power, right? Yeah, try it. Three, that makes sense, right? In different situations of political power, especially in situations of tyranny or fascism, you will often see a common theme where there's three pillars that are upholding a fascist or tyrannical government. Okay? And those three pillars, that's why it's triumvirate, three men in power. Now, it doesn't literally always have to be three people, but it's three components, three pillars that hold up fascism and tyranny. And those three are, number one, the authoritarian figurehead. So the main person, that's the authority or the tyrant. Then you have the religious or ideological justification. So you have either literally a person or the religious and ideological ideas that justify the authoritarian figure. And then the other pillar, the third pillar, is the financial support, like the capitalists, the billionaires, all that type of stuff. Ah, Savannah, see that? That's beautiful. So that's a triumvirate, right? So this idea of a triumvirate of three pillars that uphold tyranny and fascism is very important to understand in order to process what's going on in our current climate and to help us understand it from a Quranic perspective. So in the Quran, first of all, in the Quran, who would you say is the biggest tyrant, the biggest fascist, all of that stuff? Who do you guys think? I'm pretty sure everyone's going to say the same answer. Wa alaikum salam. But I want to see who. Okay, I'm not going to tell them over here what your answer just was, but they said the same thing exactly. Fir'awn. Fir'awn. Okay, so what this idea of the triumvirate does for us, and why this is important, and why this helps us to analyze the situation deeper, is it lets us know. See, a lot of times when you have a tyrant, a fascist, right? A lot of times what happens is you focus solely on that person because that person draws all of your attention. So the first thing when I said who's the biggest tyrant in the Quran, we all said, including myself, fir'awn, and that's true, right? However, with this idea of the triumvirate, uh, yeah, oh yeah, I forgot about that. The triad in psychology, the dark triad, right? But what this idea of the triumvirate does for us is it helps us analyze fascism and tyranny in a systemic way. In other words, it helps us analyze it not just from the perspective of this one authoritarian individual, but it lets us know that the way these things happen and the way these type of systems are upheld, right, is by all kind of different systems and supports that hold this thing together. And these systems and supports include religious justification or ideological justification. So religious or slash ideological, because it might not be strictly religious, but it's an ideology. It's a belief system. It's a way of thinking about something. And then you have the financial part of it that upholds it. So you have these three things, and these three things create other systems and subsystems, and all these things together create a web of interlocking systems that uphold a tyrannical government. So that's why studying the triumvirate in the Quran and in history is important to understand the situation. So, what is the triumvirate in the Quran? Does anyone know? Who are the three men in power in the Quran? We already said fir'awn. Who supported fir'awn? Who are the other two? Are there other two? See, this is the part. This is the part that we don't talk about enough. We always just focus on fir'awn. The first one, someone said Haamaan, and someone over here said qaaroon. That's exactly right. The triumvirate in the Quran. You see how deep the Quran is. When I give you the examples tomorrow, inshallah, like I said, this is just the introduction to the topic. When I give you the examples tomorrow of throughout history, how you constantly see this threefold pattern of the authoritarian figurehead, the religious justification, and the financial backing, you will be amazed. It will blow your mind of like, wow, this was in the Quran. But we don't often look at it like that. We stay so much on the surface and we're so ritualized in the way that we think about it that we don't use it to analyze current situations and we don't bring fresh perspectives, right? But when you talk about it, then it becomes obvious, right? When we start talking about it, you start thinking about it, right? Then you're like, oh yeah, qaaroon, oh haamaan. But before that, we're not thinking about it from that paradigm. You follow me? What's interesting is all three of them are mentioned in the same surah in chapter 28. But before I read that, let's read something interesting that I personally, until I started studying this, I personally had never thought about. And I would be willing to bet that quite a few people, some people might have thought about it, but I would be willing to bet quite a few people had never really thought about deeply. So let's go to 29:39. So chapter 29, verse 39. Chapter 29, verse 39. Chapter 29, verse 39. Hold on one second. He says, وَقَارُونَ وَفِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ. قارون, Fir'aun, and Haamaan. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُمْ مُوسَى بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. Listen to that. And Musa came to them with clear evidences. Right? That's the part I didn't really consider before. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُمْ مُوسَى بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. Musa came to them with clear evidences. So always when I think about the story of Fir'aun, when I think about the story of Musa, always I think about Musa is sent to Fir'aun. If I would have asked before this, if I would have said, who was Musa sent to? I'm pretty sure most of us would have said Fir'aun. I would have said that before I started studying this. If someone would have asked me, who was Musa sent to? I would have said fir'awn. But very clearly here in 29:39, it says Musa came to qaaroon, fir'awn, and haamaan. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُمْ مُوسَى بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. Musa came to all three of them with clear evidences. So Musa's message was a direct rebuke of the triumvirate system of tyranny. So if we want to understand how to confront tyranny, we need to study Musa. Musa is mentioned the most in the Quran. Out of all the prophets and messengers, he's mentioned the most. And perhaps this is why, because the likelihood of us as human beings seeking and abusing power, right, is very high. This is something that we always do. Walaikum salam, as human beings. So perhaps this is one of the benefits and wisdoms of why Musa is mentioned like 164, 168. I forget the exact amount. It's like 160 something, right? Is because he was sent to directly confront the triumvirate of tyranny, the three-headed system of tyranny based around Qaaroon and Fir'awn and Haamaan, which represents, Qaaroon represents the capitalist financial backing, Fir'awn is the authoritarian figurehead, and Haamaan is the religious authority that justifies it, that supports Fir'awn's tyrannical government. And Musa was sent to confront this triumvirate, I'll use another word, this unholy trinity. This is what it is, an unholy trinity. So Musa was sent to confront an unholy trinity of power and tyranny and fascism. And that's something personally, before I started studying this is so beautiful of how the Quran continually opens up oceans of knowledge and wisdom the more you study it. Because how many times have we read this verse in our lives? I've probably read this verse hundreds of times just because of being Muslim, 30 some years. I've read the Quran a bunch of different times, and I've probably read this verse countless times and never contemplated the fact that Musa was just not sent to Fir'awn, he was sent to confront an unholy trinity of tyranny, representing financial backing, authoritarian figurehead, and religious justification. Look at another verse. Chapter 40, verse 24. Chapter 40, verse 24. He says, well, actually, verse 23 and 24. He says, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا وَسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ. And truly we sent Musa with our ayats, with our signs, and a clear authority, إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَقَارُونَ. To Fir'awn and Haaman and Qaaroon. فَقَالُوا, so they all said, سَاحِرٌ كَذَّابٌ. They all said he is a liar and a magician. Musa, absolutely. Musa was an activist. Musa, subhanAllah, Musa was confronting injustice. He was confronting fascism. He was confronting tyranny. He was confronting the unholy trinity of the authoritarian figure with financial backing and religious support. SubhanAllah. Then look what they said. فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ بِالْحَقِّ. So when he came to them with al-haq, min indina, from us, قَالُوا قَتُلُوا أَبْنَاءَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ وَاسْتَحْيُوا نِسَاءَهُم. They said, kill. They said, kill, subhanAllah. They said, kill, salam, the sons of those who believe with him, and let the women remain. Now, let's think about this symbolically. What do the sons represent? The sons represent those who are active, those who are a challenge, those who are a threat. And the women, we don't have to take it literally, right? We don't have to take it literally. What does the women represent symbolically? Those who are vulnerable, those who are not a threat. Not literally, because some women are stronger than some men, in my opinion. I'm talking about what could we think of these words as symbolically? So when Musa came as an activist against the triumvirate of tyranny and fascism, represented by these three archetypes of fir'awn, qaaroon, and haamaan, they all said, kill those who would challenge us. Let's translate it differently. Kill those who would challenge us and let those who are weak live. They said, "Uqtulu abna alladhina amanu ma'ahu." Kill the abna, kill those who are going to come out against us, and let those who are more vulnerable, who don't pose a threat to us, let them live. وَمَا كَيْدُ الْكَافِرِينَ إِلَّا فِي ضَلَالٍ. And the plan of the kafirin, the plot of the kafirin, is nothing except fi dalal, being astray, right? So subhanallah, look at the message of Musa. Look at the message of Musa, and look at who he was sent to. He was sent to three, not just one. It very clearly says, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا وَسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَقَارُونَ. Sent to three. But why is it that he's always talking to Fir'aun then? So that shows you how this works, because Fir'aun is the tyrant, the authoritarian figurehead, right? And Haamaan and Qaaroon are the systems that support him. So Haamaan and Qaaroon don't necessarily even have to be, in our interpretation, just people or individuals. They can represent systems. That's why I said they're archetypes. So Haamaan represents the religious system that justifies tyranny, and Qaaroon represents the financial system that justifies tyranny. And Fir'aun is the archetype of the authoritarian figurehead. Subhanallah. Now look at these three in chapter 28. So two verses, they're all three mentioned together in reference to Musa being sent to them or coming to them. And then look at how they're all three mentioned in chapter 28. So in chapter 28, let's go to chapter 28. The first verse that we're going to go to in chapter 28. If you want to understand how to confront tyranny, how to confront injustice, how to stand up for people's rights, it's the story of Musa. I'm seeing that now. I'm telling you that, but it's not that. I'm not telling you that as like something that I've figured out like a long time ago. That's why I truly believe, and I want to share this point. I truly believe that the best way, one of the best ways, I don't want to say the best way, one of the best ways to understand the Quran is by living it, by lived experience. So when you go through different experiences, you'll think about the Quran in a way you never thought about it before. Because again, I've read these verses many times, never thought about it like that until these current experiences started happening, and I started to become more curious about what does the Quran say about fascism? What does the Quran say about how to confront tyranny? Right? Oh, Ramses the second, subhanAllah. Yeah. So listen to this, chapter 28. We'll start with verse 4, right? Because I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just want to give you some quick highlights, and then we're going to come back to this topic tomorrow. He says, Inna fir'awn ala fil ard. Truly, Fir'aun ala fil ard. He elevated himself in the land. Number one, look at the authoritarian figurehead. He elevates himself, right? So he makes himself like he is the person. He is the God. He is the one everyone should return to. He is the one that's going to fix everything. He is the one that should be obeyed in an unquestioning way. Ala fil ard. وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. Listen to this. وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. And he made its people into different warring groups, different divided factions. SubhanAllah. Listen to that. He divided its people. وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. That's the tyrant. That's the authority. That's the authoritarian. He knows that the easiest way to control the people is to make them fight each other. He's a Democrat, he's Republican, he's middle class, he's poor, he's a billionaire, right? Put them all into these different groups and just let them fight each other. Keep them distracted. Exactly. Keep them distracted with fighting each other while the real strategy, the real system is playing out behind all of that, right? وجعل أهلها شيعا يستضعف طائفة منهم يذبح أبناءهم ويستحيي نساءهم. Weakening يستضعف طائفة منهم. Weakening a group from amongst them. I want you to think about this phrase really carefully. I'm going to read it again. Wa alaikum salam. Let's read it again. I always love when you come on, Squeaker of the House. I just love your username. Your username always brings me joy. Right? I want to read this phrase again. I want you to think about this real quick. And a potential meaning of it. When he says here, he says that's exactly what political party. Yeah, exactly. He says, وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. He made its people into different groups. يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُم. He sought to weaken a group from amongst them. A group from amongst them. Think about that again. Why did he seek to weaken a group from amongst them? He divided all of the people, it says. Wa alaikum salam. Inshallah, subhanAllah. May Allah have mercy upon her. SubhanAllah. I'm sorry to hear that. May Allah make it easy for you too. I know that's got to be rough. I lost my mom some years ago, so I know that's not easy. I'm really sorry to hear about that. Inshallah, hopefully, if you see us on live again, or if you want to email me, if you could maybe just keep us up to date on like how you're doing, and how the family's doing and how you're dealing with it, inshallah. So yeah, please do that, man. SubhanAllah, that's a rough one. And it's really, SubhanAllah, yeah, it's hard to deal with. And it's really difficult to just transition, back to the class and stuff like that. Just knowing that you sharing that. So in transitioning back to the class, I don't want you to think like that's a light thing that you shared with us. Because we definitely are sorry to hear that. No. Not at all. You didn't do anything wrong. I was just saying that because, eventually when we start talking about the class again, I don't want you to think that we're not taking what you said seriously and we're just like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, and then we're back to the class. I don't want you to take it like that. So hopefully it doesn't come across like that. And inshallah, like I said, my email is in my bio. If you need someone to talk to, if you want to email me, please do, inshallah. And salam alaikum, and may Allah reward you. So that's really hard to do to translation. I'm sorry about that. If I seem a little awkward, because I don't. That's rough, man. I don't want anyone to ever feel like we don't take that seriously, man. Subhanallah. So, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, like I was saying, in this verse here, when he says, وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا, and he made its people into different warring groups, notice he says right after that, يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُمْ. He sought to weaken a group of them. It doesn't say he sought to weaken all of them. He sought to weaken a group of them, right? So one of the things that potentially tells me, like psychologically, is that he could have said he tried to weaken all of them, but he sought to weaken a group of them. So perhaps one of the things we see from that is that someone who is an authoritarian, they don't want everyone to feel like they're weak. They want a group to be weak and a group to be strong in order to cause that conflict between them. Follow me? They want them to conflict. They want a group to be oppressed, and they want a group to be the oppressors. And that's how they keep that tension in society. And that's how they control. So now let's go to same chapter. Let's go to verse 6. So verse 6, he says, um, وَنُمَكِّنَ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Exactly. The tactics are still being used. Exactly. That's why I'm sharing this, because I think the Quran is so profound. Like I think we forget, and this is, to me, is very sad. Like I think we forget that the Quran came in the context of great injustice. And the Quran was a document, and I don't mean like a literal, like written document, but it was a text that was meant to undercut injustice. It literally undercutted the systems of injustice that existed at the time. Why do you think they fought against the Prophet Muhammad so fiercely? Right? Because they're inheriting women, they're burying little girls. Women don't have, any rights. They're just property, they're just being inherited. And he comes, and there's a verse that says, La yahillu lakum an tarithu nisaa karha. It's not allowable for you to do that. You can't inherit women. They're not just property. You can't inherit them against their will. He's overturning like these norms that are taken for granted, right? That's what the Quran was doing. You think he was just just he just came into that society, and he was like, oh, no, it's fine. Like, don't speak against them. Don't cause any problems. No, he caused problems. He caused problems, but good problems. And I'm not saying, let me make it clear, I'm not saying anything like violence. I don't mean like that. Because I'm completely against any form of violence. But what I'm talking about is confronting and speaking about injustice and the unjust systems, the systems of injustice that exist in society. Do you think the Prophet Muhammad was opposed so violently because he came with a message of like, oh no, you want to bury your daughters? It's cool. Like that ain't really none of my business. Like you do you, I'm gonna do me. Like that's not what he did. So this whole idea that people have of just like sitting back and like this, they call it quietism, where they're not going to speak about the rulers. Like they just had, I'm gonna touch on something controversial, forgive me, but I'm going to touch on it. I was just watching some videos that they have going around, and I didn't really research it a lot, to be fair, so I don't know all the background around it. But just from what I saw, um I was looking at in Riyadh, when they were dancing and stuff, and they had like the image of the Kaaba, and what looked to be the image of the Kaaba. I'm sure someone's going to say that's not what it really was, but it looked like it. Um, and I was thinking about that, and I'm like, okay, so you got all these, brothers, mostly I see, that come out and they defend Saudi Arabia. I'm not against. I don't have no issues with Saudi Arabia personally, but I think, to be fair, you know, when you come out, if someone comes out and criticizes the practices of certain rulers of certain countries, then you have all these people who come out and they say, "Oh, MBS is Salafi, like he's Salafi, like oh, don't criticize, he's Salafi, right?" And he's allowing that to happen. But let a sister get on TikTok without her hijab, and it's damn near World War III. Like the injustice, the imbalance, the unfairness, it just blows my mind. I'm sorry to touch on something controversial, but it just makes no sense to me that like something like that you have nothing to say about. But if a woman got one little hair out, like you got fatwas, you got videos, you got refutations, you got all this type of stuff. So be just. Be just. If you're going to speak about something you feel is wrong, speak about that too. Don't justify that because the scholars that you follow happen to reside there. Okay, alhamdulillah. Like we don't have to vilify them, but be just in your condemnation of what's wrong. Don't just direct it at those that you consider vulnerable and weak, but people that are in power, and the people that you like, you don't direct that to, right? That's not fair. So my point being, yeah, I tried to I tried to be fair and politically correct in what I said. So hopefully you read between the lines. But what I'm just trying to say is that I just don't think that's a fair perspective, and I also don't think that people get like what the Quran did when it was originally revealed. The Quran criticized the social structures that existed at that time because they were unfair and unjust, especially towards people that were vulnerable, like women and like orphans and people that didn't have tribal support. It supported them and it spoke against the systems of injustice. And that's why they opposed the Prophet Muhammad, right? They didn't just oppose him because he was just like, all right, they ain't got nothing to do with me. Like they're good. Like so, I don't get that. I don't get that perspective. Like I don't know how people read the Quran and get that out of it. So when we see these verses, that's why I shared all that. When we see these verses, that's why these verses are so deep and so important because it gives us a mentality. Again, we're not speaking about. I got to make sure I say this because we're recording. We're on TikTok. I want to make sure it's clear. We're not talking about anything violent or anything like that. We're talking about, like someone said earlier, about being activists, right? About activism. I'm sorry to hear that too. About slavery was an issue too. I'm sorry to hear that about your parents. Mine also did too. SubhanAllah. Slavery was an issue at the time too. So, so I think that's that same mentality, like that activist mentality, where where we that same mentality, that activist mentality where we confront systems of injustice, that's also the message of the Quran. And I think that's something that we need to incorporate more, all in our own ways. We don't all have to do it in the same way, right? Because we're all different. We all have different talents and gifts, but we all should try to, as much as possible, speak about and be active towards removing injustice from the world. So the verse that we're reading, verse 6 in chapter 28, he says, he says, وَنُمَكِّنَ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. He says, when we established them, or we intended to establish them in the earth, right? Meaning, if you go back to the previous verses, the people that he said that fir'awn was weakening, that he was going to establish them in the earth. وَنُرِيَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَجُنُودَهُمَا مِنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يَحْذَرُونَ. And we wanted to show Fir'aun and Haamaan and their armies from amongst them what they were fearing. TikTok making me solve a puzzle to prove I'm a human. There we go. Okay, so listen to this. It says, and we wanted to establish them in the land, and we wanted to show Fir'aun and Haamaan وَجُنُودَهُمَا and their armies مَا كَانُوا يَحْذَرُونَ what they were fearing. Why does it? So first of all, it mentions Fir'aun and Haamaan together, but why does it say their armies? جُنُودَهُمَا, their armies. One of the ways to think about that is, what do armies represent? Armies represent systems that uphold injustice or unjust policies, right? So their armies, like, so if you take both of them, Fir'aun is the authoritarian figurehead. So he represents kind of like the physical violence. Like he wants to kill people. He wants to do all these different things. So he's physical, like he's the war guy. Like he wants to come at people. So he has his armies and his systems that support that. And then you have Haamaan, right? And he has his armies, but he's not the physical guy. He's the ideological guy. He's the religious guy, right? And he has his armies, meaning he has religious figures. He has religious ideas. He has all these different things that are meant to support the system of tyranny that Fir'aun represents, right? Because that's another way that people convince others to follow an authoritarian figure. How do they convince them? Is they support it with ideology. They make you think like, oh, this is the superior people, right? We've seen that throughout history. You have this authoritarian figure, but then you have the ideology that's created around it. Remember, we said there's three things: the triumvirate. There's the authoritarian figure, there's the religious or the ideological, and then there's the money. Those are the three things that support the system of tyranny. So you have one person that's the authoritarian. Here is fir'awn. And then you have haamaan, and they both have armies, meaning they both have systems that support their injustice. In the case of fir'awn, it's the literal physical threats because he threatened to kill Musa, for example. With haamaan, it's more related to religion and ideology. And you see that throughout history, right? Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, let's go to the next verse. It's in the same surah. It's in verse 8. No, let's skip that one. Actually, let's go to verse 38. So 28, 38. 28, 38 is the next verse. Notice how all of these are in the same chapter. 28, 38. He says here, وَقَالَ فِرْعَوْنُ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأُ, and Fir'aun said, O council, يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأُ, O my council, مَا عَلِمْتُ لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَهٍ غَيْرِي. He said, I don't know of any other God for you except me. Look, this is the authoritarian figurehead. I don't know any other God except me. You think that applies today? Has anyone been called like the savior? Has anyone been treated like a savior? I'll leave you to think about that. I think so. Right? He said, I don't know of any God other than me. فَأَوْقِدْ لِي يَا هَامَانُ عَلَى الطِّينِ فَاجْعَلْ لِي صَرْحًا لَعَلِّي أَطَّلِعُ إِلَى إِلَهِ مُوسَى وَإِنِّي لَأَظُنُّهُ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ. He says, Fir'aun is saying this. He says, I don't know any other God except me. So he tells Haamaan, so فَأَوْقِدْ لِي يَا هَامَانُ, he says, O Haamaan, kindle for me upon clay, like a fire, right? فَجَعَلْ لِي صَرْحًا, and make for me a sarh, like some kind of a structure. لَعَلِّي أَطَّلِعُ إِلَى إِلَهِ مُوسَى, so I could see the God of Moses, right? So I could see the God of Moses. وَإِنِّي لَأَظُنُّهُ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ, and I think that he's one of the liars. So he's telling Haamaan what part does Haamaan have to play here? Haamaan is related to the religious ideology because Fir'aun is telling him, I don't think you have any God but me. Haamaan, come on, man, build me something. I want to see the God of Moses. Like, let me see the God of Moses. Let me see where the God of Moses. I'm the God, right? So we don't necessarily have to take it literally that he really thought he was going to see the God of Moses, right? That's one way to think about it. But another way to think about it is this is Fir'aun employing Haamaan to create religious ideology to show or to show people, at least according to what he thought, that the God of Moses is a ridiculous idea. That's ridiculous. I'm your God. That's what he's saying, right? And he has Haamaan. He employs Haamaan to help him prove that. Build something for me. Let's look. Let's see. This God that Moses is talking about. Let's build it, right? And that aligns with, when you think about it, when you think about interpreting it like that, that aligns with what the Quran says that Fir'aun did to his people. So in another verse, he says, Fir'aun فَاسْتَخَفَّ قَوْمَهُ فَأَطَاعُوهُ, that he belittled his people. He trivialized them. He made them think in a very trivial way, right? So when you put the verses together, one way to interpret this that makes sense to me is he wasn't necessarily literally saying that he thought he was actually going to see the God of Moses. It was a way of him further trivializing the thought process of his people, like saying, okay, this God of Moses, if he's real, let's see him. And the people, oh wow, people think stuff like that is impressive. Oh wow, that makes sense because you couldn't see him, so he didn't build it, so it didn't work. So yeah, Pharaoh must be God, right? So because he trivialized the thought process of people to the point that they just believe anything, right? They just believe even things that don't make any logical sense, right? So that's maybe one way to think about it. And Allah knows best. There could be other ways. I'm not saying that's the only way, but just putting it together to help us understand how tyranny works. This is part of how it works. He draws on Haamaan to show that the God of Moses is silly. In the same way that we might bring up certain ideas, right? Even if it's not particularly about Allah Himself, but we might bring up other ideas like justice, like other ideas, right? And um, people might portray those ideas in a way that makes it seem silly, right? In order to try to convince people that, oh man, don't really have to worry about all that, man. Like it's not really even that big a deal, right? Just the economy is going to be better and this is going to happen. Don't really worry about that. So that's how it works, right? You have this religious justification. Then in the same surah, so that's Haamaan. Remember, we said there's three: fir'awn, qaaroon, and Haamaan. So that's Haamaan. So qaaroon is at the end of the chapter. So at the end of the chapter, we find in verse 76. So this is 28:76, where he says, "Inna qaaroon kana min qawmi Musa fabaga alayhim." He says, truly Qaaroon was from the people of Musa, فَبَغَى عَلَيْهِمْ, and he transgressed against them. وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْكُنُوزِ إِنَّ مَفَاتِحَهُ مَا إِنَّ مَفَاتِحَهُ لَتَنُوءُ بِالْعُصْبَةِ أُولِي الْقُوَّةِ. And we gave him, I'm not sure this is an introduction. Yes, it is an introduction. There's a lot more. And I'm about to wrap it up in a second, the introduction part. He says, and we gave him treasures that the keys of those treasures would be a burden, right? Would be a burden for a group of strong people to carry. So he had a lot of money, a lot of treasures. And what did he say? كَانَ مِنْ قَوْمِ مُوسَى فَبَغَى عَلَيْهِمْ. He was from the people of Musa and he transgressed against them. So to wrap up, because this is just an introduction, we're going to go deeper into this tomorrow. But just to wrap up, let's think about this one more time to bring it all together. So we read a couple verses where it says that Musa, it connected Musa being sent to all three of these, right? Fir'awn, Qaaroon, and Haamaan. And we said that this represents the triumvirate of tyranny, meaning three pillars, three archetypes, three people that uphold a fascist or tyrannical system. Fir'awn represents the authoritarian figure, right? Haamaan represents the religious figure, and that's why Fir'awn said, build for me something to see the God of Moses. And Qaaroon represents the financial backing because he had treasures that even the keys would be too much for a group of strong people to carry. And it says he was from the people of Musa and he transgressed against them. So these three components, when you look throughout history, you find these three components recurring again and again in governments that uphold tyranny and fascism: the authoritarian figurehead, the financial backing, and the religious support. So, inshallah, that's where we'll leave it for today. And I'll see you tomorrow. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah. Hopefully that was